possible. So I hope that that will be okay.
Sure.
But I wanted to first thank you tremendously for sparing the time today. The students are looking forward to hearing from you. Um, I spoke to you about the students before, so you've got a
Mhm.
very interesting crowd and audience here today. Alhamdulillah. Um, and we've been discussing Turkey intermittently over the last few days. So in addition to your lecture and your talk over the next sort of 45 minutes, I think that you'll find that they have a lot of questions that will relate directly to what you're about to discuss, but more broadly on the subject of Turkish Islamic and Islamist movements. So on behalf of Bayan, thank you very much for sparing the time. We appreciate it very much. Um, and I personally look forward to hearing your lecture and benefiting from it, I am sure. But I think you'll find a very engaging audience for you today. So, Bismillah. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for inviting me. Before I start, am I able to share a screen? Like, will they be able to
Yes,
see if I?
yes.
Okay.
I mean, so this is on Zoom. There's a screen. You can't see it, of course, but there's
Yeah.
a large screen over there. And you should be able to share your screen just like normal on any Zoom call.
Okay.
Uh, why don't you try doing that
So
now?
I just
Okay.
did.
Yeah, we can see it. We can't
Okay.
now we can't see you, not on that big screen.
Mm-hmm.
But we can see your shared screen.
I see. So I cannot put myself at the same time.
Um, there might be a way to do it. Let me just see.
I think
Because
I think if you change the view setting of the Zoom.
yeah, just a second. Okay. All right, good. I've done that. You're kind of small, but oh wait, I can make you bigger. Hang on.
I'm small anyway.
No, that's not true. Okay, can you guys read the screen? Can you guys read the slide? Or is it too small? Uh, Okay, then we're gonna leave it at that. Okay, so now they can see you and they can also read. I'm just gonna make your slide bigger so that it's very clear. So can you all read? Can you read the slide?
Yes, 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 sir.
You can read the slide? Awesome, you can read the slide? Okay, then you guys are the furthest out. You can't read this? No, that's what it is a little bit small. It's all right, that's what
I will be reading them anyway,
Yeah,
and
I
the
know, but still. Okay,
following
well,
slides will probably be
I think
bigger.
this works. This works, inshallah. Okay, Bismillah.
Okay. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Okay, I have a big task. I need to talk about Nursi and Justice and Development Party in the context of Islamic/Islamist movements, as I understand the course is about, and then in the context of Turkey within that larger context. So I'll try my best. I will try to limit the time that I talk as much as possible, and then try to leave time for questions. I am, setting my timer here, and we'll see how it goes. So I thought we could first perhaps set the stage and ask a couple questions in order to get to the real material that we want to discuss today. So the first thing I think we need to start with is what happens at the beginning of the Republic of Turkey. In the Republic of Turkey, or as they prefer to call it now, Turkey, was founded in 1923 through a war of resistance, or you can call it a war of liberation. And as you know, all wars of liberation, or almost all wars of liberation, lead to this led to the formation of a almost monolithic power structure in the country. So there was a clique that held on to power at the end of this war of liberation, and they were products of late 19th, early 20th centuries world or Ottoman westernized institutions, and they were mostly positivist, secularist, in many cases materialist, and did not have very positive opinions about religion. And as soon as they came to power, they started to impose these views onto the country's legal system, state institutions, etc. So what you see on the screen are a few examples of the kinds of things that they did. 1924, about 1922, they abolished sultanate. The caliphate remained, but then you ended up having a caliphate without power, actual power. That was kind of a oxymoron. But 2 years after, regardless, they abolished the caliphate too. They passed a law called Law on Unity of Education, which closed all religious seminaries, all madrasas in the country, all madrasas and maktabs too. So religious education literally became next to impossible or non-existent. They opened what you see there is called Imam and Preacher schools or Imam Khatib schools, 29 of them, but did not fund them. And by 1926, within 2 years, there were only 2 left, and in 1930, there was none left. So literally between 1930 and 1946 or so, there was no legally recognized religious education in the country, and it was actually banned. They closed Sharia courts. They transferred all property from awqaf, religious endowments, to the prime ministry, and these awqaf were the sources of funding madrasas, also Sufi lodges, and all sorts of charity organizations in the country. So that was all nationalized, collected in the hands of the government. They did some symbolic things like passing a law on wearing top hats with visors, which the Muslim population of the country associated with the invading British and the French and so on and so forth, and they thought of this as next to equivalent to becoming a disbeliever. They abolished the Majalla, which was a law code prepared based on Sharia, although that again is there are like problems there, but that's not our subject. That they abolished the religious law basically, and they adopted various law codes from Europe, as you can see there: civil law from Switzerland, criminal law from Italy, etc. They would do some modifications, but at the end of the day, these were European laws. 1928, they deleted the religion of the state as Islam, which was in the Constitution before. From the Constitution. They introduced an alphabet reform and shifted to the Latin script, which meant that the Arabic script was not in use for functional literacy anymore, but they also banned the Arabic script, which meant that nobody could teach the Quran, again, officially, legally, over the ground. People did this under the ground, but not openly. They also introduced a language reform, which was meant to purge Arabic and Persian origin words from the Turkish language, and the effects of that we can actually see now. Later on, they eased on that, but the language of even the 1930s, Turkey is not accessible to the man in the street today. In Turkey, they would have to study and try to understand it. And since language preserves much of the religious tradition too, that was a huge blow. 1932, they banned adhan, and they introduced in Turkish something as a call to prayer. 1937, finally, they introduced laicism in the Constitution. And these are only some examples. There's a larger context in which this is happening, but again, we will move on. You I think, get the point from this. Now, when the madrasas were closed, there was an association of madrasa professors in Istanbul. This is 1924. And they were very sad about it because they were not into this only for the money. They were into this because of their devotion as well. So they came together and tried to figure out a way if they could perhaps continue teaching, and they sent a telegraph to to Ankara, saying that they understand that the country is just out of the war, the state does not have money. So they said, we, the undersigned, are ready to teach religion without any monetary compensation to the willing Muslim children. And the head of this association was this person, Süleyman Hilmi Tunahan. He will come again in the lecture. They sent this to the Republican government in Ankara, and the response was very precise, very terse, and threatening. It said the law on unity of education is in effect, and this law is the law that banned madrasas and madrasa teaching. Acting against its stipulations is subject to severe punishment. So it was clear, right, that the government did not want religious education. And I did not put in here, but in 1925 that they also banned Sufism or Sufi orders in the country. They closed all the Sufi lodges. The entire institutional setting that preserved Sufism in the country, and it was mostly the Naqshbandiya. Not only the Naqshbandiya, but mostly the Naqshbandiya was also banned. Later in the 1930s, they would also persecute many of the Sufi masters, and many of them escaped the country or were executed or had to stop their activity. So when you think about this, madrasas and Sufi lodges, or madrasas and Sufism, or the scholarly tradition and the Sufi tradition, are institutionally the two main factors that have preserved religion and religiosity in Muslim countries, Muslim communities, at least since the 11th century, right? So these two main institutions are gone. The caliphate as the political institution that is tasked with the preservation of religion and religiosity in the country is gone. It was a desperate place for pious people, for believing pious Muslims who also thought of preserving the piety, religion, and religiosity of a larger community as a responsibility, the scholars and Sufi masters, etc. So this is a news clip from when the Adhan was banned. 19 people were caught calling the Adhan in Arabic, and they were put in jail, just to make this more real. Now, while this was the case, and we see a clear attack on religion in the starting from mid-1920s, the 1930s up to end of 1940s, about a quarter of a century, religion was preserved in Turkey to a large extent. Not for everybody, but Islam was preserved in Turkey. So I can identify, again, going over this very quickly, three main reasons for this. One is that we have a shallow state, a weak state, a dirt poor country. The state has not inherited much from the Ottoman Empire, because Ottoman Empire was in war for more than a decade, and then occupied by British, French, etc. And the government had to build everything in Ankara. The government of Ankara had to build everything from scratch, and it did not have the resources for this. It did not have. It could not tax the population. The population did not have money to give to the state. What that means is that the reach of the state was very limited. So Turkey was about 80+% rural, almost 20% urban. The state was able to reach, in those 25 years or so, was able to reach the urban centers of the country, but did not penetrate the villages much. So 80% or so of the population was, I'm not going to say left untouched, but was not fully under the influence of this anti-religious movement in the country. Now, this has another related, this takes us to another related reason for the resilience of Islam in the country, and that is that the founders of the republic, this Republican elite, had an optimistic belief in the triumph of secular modernity, what they were presenting as the way to go in those urban centers. opening opera houses, changing the clothing into European clothing, teaching European sciences at school, etc., etc. And they did not think that they had to intervene in society at a structural level, the way we have examples of intervention, say, in the Soviet Union, where the party state would penetrate society down to the village level and destroy existing networks and societal institutions. Right? That did not happen in Turkey, partly because they were also afraid that that communism would come to the country. Right? So there was this ideological inhibition too. Now this is why this is the weakness of the state or the limitedness of the state. But that does not explain all, because aside from that, there were people, in some cases, institutions that preserved religion in the country too. And that is going to be primarily what we will be talking about today. Now, as I said, this person will come up again, Süleyman Hilmi Tunahan, the head of the Association of Madrasa Professors in Istanbul, who telegraphed Ankara. He was also a Naqshbandi sheikh, and later, starting 1930s and 1940s, he started to teach under the ground, surreptitiously, a few students how to read the Quran, the basics of, like, if you think of a madrasa education, like the first year education or something like that, not anything beyond that. How to read the Quran, how to lead prayer, and the basics that a village imam would need. Right? He would do this and teach a few students and send them to places in Anatolia where they would usually serve as village imams, but require them to teach what he taught them to a few other people. Right? So a network of basic scholarship emerged from this, and that still is a movement in Turkey called Süleymancız. After this person's name, Süleyman is his name, called Süleymancız. And in the 1950s and 1960s, until the rise of what will become Imam Preachers schools in the 1970s, they were the ones, in most cases, to provide village imams in the country, and they are still active today. They are not a part of the discussion today. This is not, I'm not lecturing about them, so I'm only putting that out there and moving on. But this is something that needs to be taken into consideration, and there's very little work about this movement. They have been very secretive. Second, various Sufi orders, although they were banned, remember the state is not able to penetrate deep into the villages. Various Sufi orders remained, usually in mountain villages, distant areas, and then they would come back after the 1950s when things would change in Turkey, but very limited. Again, they could not do anything publicly, and this is all happening under the ground. Okay. Third, this will be more relevant to our discussion because it's going to lead us to Justice and Development Party. After World War II, 1945, 1946, the ruling, this was a one-party state until 1950. The ruling one-party, Republican People's Party, felt the need to democratize the country because Turkey had remained neutral during World War II until the last 3 months, during which time the result had become apparent. And at that point, they had joined with the Allies, but the Soviet Union did not recognize this as a true act of solidarity. And post-war, they started to make certain demands on Turkey, one of which was control over the Straits, the Bosphorus and Gallipoli, and another was some territory in northeast Turkey, which required Turkey to approach NATO, not NATO, but US, and then as NATO formed, so the allied powers, and this required democratization. So the one-party state introduced the opportunity for the foundation of multiple parties, and in that context, as a response to populist demand, they also started to open some religious schools, very basic religious schools. In that context, this man, Jalaluddin Ökten, who was a madrasa professor himself, but then taught philosophy during those 25 years in various schools. He taught philosophy, was given the task of refounding imam and preacher schools. And this happens in 1950 when one of the newly founded political parties gains the majority in the parliament and replaces the Republican People's Party. So from 1950 on, the regime changes. Turkey becomes a multi-party democracy, flawed in many respects, but still a multi-party democracy. And the new government, it's called the Democratic Party, the new Democratic Party government was more relaxed, more tolerant to religion, and they allowed the foundation of Imam Hatip schools. Jalaluddin Ökten founded the first Imam Hatip school, and those schools actually flourished mostly by popular support. People would come together with charity and build a building and gift it to the government to be opened as an Imam Hatip school. As you can see, we will see other numbers about this, almost 200,000 students in 1998, 1999. Right? So this is a vein of development combined with the Sufi, some of the Sufi movements that will lead to Justice and Development Party. Now, next, we have Bediüzzaman Said Nursi. I think Bediüzzaman Said Nursi requires maybe 3 lectures by himself, but we will try to do as much as we can. He was a Kurdish origin scholar of Islam from the Ottoman Empire and the Turkish Republic. Well, I wrote in 1876 here. This is probably 1878. The birth date is a bit questionable. 78 is probably more reasonable. I should change this on this slide. So born 1878 during the Russo-Ottoman War in what is today Southeast Turkey, in a Kurdish village, where the Khalidi branch of the Naqshbandiya was very effective, and the vicinity was surrounded by several madrasas and Khalidi Naqshbandi Sufi masters. He was born in that context and wanted to be a scholar, but he had today they call it gifted. He was a gifted student, a gifted child. He had a very sharp memory, a photographic memory, and a very sharp mind. He could make connections between things very quickly and very accurately and very incisively. And because of this giftedness, he could not find a teacher to teach him for a while. He moved from madrasa to madrasa. Eventually, however, when he was 14 or so, he finds a madrasa professor in a town called Bayazid, in the town of Van today. He finds a professor in this madrasa, Bayazid madrasa, who understands the nature of the student and lets him be. So he was best when he studied things on his own and then went to his professor and asked questions when he did not understand it. So Nursi goes to this madrasa, starts studying with this professor. Most of the time, he doesn't stay in the madrasa, but he stays in the tomb of a 17th century Kurdish Sufi master, Ahmed Khani, and studies there. And there are all sorts of things suggesting that there were like karamat, like miracles, like saintly miracles, etc., happening. Other students would go and listen to what was happening in the tomb, and they would hear Nursi saying "Bala Sayda," meaning yes sir, yes sir, yes sir, as though he was receiving instruction from somebody, etc. He goes through the entire madrasa curriculum within less than 2 years there. Not only studies the book, but also memorizes them. He goes through his tests and passes all the tests and receives his general certification, madrasa certification, at age 15 or 16. And then with this certification, ijaza, he starts traveling around the towns of the region. This was a custom, like students would do this. He debates people in places where he goes, and he becomes famous because he's never defeated in any of his debates. And there, people start to call him Bedi'uz Zaman, which means marvel of the time. Later, as he becomes, more famous, the governor of one of the towns, the town of Van, recognizes him and invites him to Van to stay in his mansion. And Bediüzzaman Said Nursi accepts this and stays in the mansion of this governor, who appears to be an intellectual in his own right, with a large library of various books and also subscriptions to journals, etc. And Nursi also becomes familiar with what we may call European origin positive sciences, exact sciences like biology, geography, astronomy, chemistry, physics, etc. And he excels in all of those too. This governor actually enjoys bringing in experts of various things, like brings a geography teacher from the high school, for instance, and has that geography teacher debate with Bediüzzaman Said Nursi at the dinner table and things like this. And again, he's never defeated in any of these debates. He founds his own madrasa there, and he starts teaching. And then he comes up with an idea of a system of madrasas that he wants to found in this region, and he wants to teach both the religious sciences and positive or exact sciences together in Arabic, Turkish, and Kurdish at the same time. And this requires a lot of money. So he goes to Istanbul in the very end of 1907. He goes to Istanbul to procure money for this endeavor with a letter from the governor. But that doesn't go too well because he doesn't know the manners and ways of the high society in Istanbul. He acts like this mountain person from the Kurdish lands, and he actually ending up in a mental asylum because he yells at the aide-de-camp of the Sultan. So they say, okay, this man must be crazy. They put him in the mental asylum. But after 3 months, the doctors there say, well, no, this man is not, mad. He is smarter than all of you. They let him out. Around that time, there was a coup that happens in the Ottoman Empire. 1908, the Young Turks intervene and introduce a constitution. A constitutional monarchy is established called Meşrutiyet. And Nursi likes this idea. Throughout his entire life, he was a pro-freedom, pro-liberalism, pro-pluralism, what we today call democracy kind of person. So he supports the constitutional monarchy at the time on condition that he keeps saying this needs to be based on the Sharia, like the what limits the monarchy, what the constitution needs to be based on the Sharia. So Meşrutiyet meşru'a is the word that he uses. But then he becomes disillusioned with the Young Turks because they prove not to be the freedom lovers, etc. They became dictatorial themselves. He secures some money for his madrasa system, goes back to Van, leaves the Young Turks and goes back to Van to establish his madrasa. And he actually lays the foundations for one of the buildings of this system. But World War I starts. When the war starts, the Russian/Armenian forces enter eastern Anatolia and they move southward. So the lands where Said Nursi were occupied by Russian and Armenian forces. So he organizes a voluntary unit, initially from among his students, and then others also join. And this becomes a hit mission unit throughout the war. They become a very important militia contribution to the organized army. And eventually he was wounded, his leg breaks, and he was taken as a prisoner of war and taken to Russia, to a town called Kostroma, northeast of Moscow. And he spends close to 2 years there as a prisoner of war. They put him in a small mosque. Now there are Muslims living in there, Tatars. They put him in a small Tatar mosque, and he spent most of his time almost in seclusion in that small mosque. And he says that during that seclusion, he goes through what we may think of as a suluk, a spiritual journey that starts there and then continues with intervals up until 1924, 26. Maybe 24 is a more reasonable time. So we have 7-8 years of a spiritual journey happening with Nursi. So the Bolshevik Revolution takes place. He takes advantage of the chaos and escapes and comes to Istanbul. And this is also after the war. The British are occupying Istanbul, but the Istanbul government is also the government. And he was a very well-known scholar already. And now he comes back as a war veteran too, a mujahid too. So he was very well welcome and appointed to an institution called Darul Hikmat al-Islamiyya, the House of the Wisdom of Islam, which was established as a high institute where they would gather the most accomplished scholars and task them with the questions that the Muslim world is facing at the time. So he starts working there, and then there is the war of resistance in Anatolia that is taking shape, and he supports the war of resistance. He supports the anti-colonial movement, if you will, with his publications. And as a result of that, the British passed a shooting order in his name. So he was supposed to be shot wherever he was found in Istanbul. So he goes underground, and eventually the Ankara, the newly forming Ankara government invites him to come to Ankara and support them, and he goes to Ankara. There he meets the newly emerging leadership of the newly emerging country and becomes really disillusioned with that. But taking inspiration from some of the hadith about Dajjal, in which the Prophet says that if Dajjal comes after me, everybody has to fend off for themselves. He decides that this newly emerging movement cannot be fought through political means or through war, and there has to be something else. He doesn't know what the something else is yet, but some ideas are forming. He leaves Ankara, goes to one, withdraws to a mountain cave with a few, like 3 or 4 students, and starts to spend his time there teaching these students. And in the meanwhile, some ideas are coming to him. He actually is writing some small treatises and taking notes, actually. Remember, he's going through the spiritual journey. Khatirat, thoughts are coming, and he keeps taking notes of those thoughts. 1925, there was a rebellion in the region, a Kurdish rebellion. He was not involved in this rebellion. His name is Said. The leader of the rebellion was Said, so there's some confusion, and there was confusion at the time too. But he was not involved in this rebellion. He actually discouraged it, saying that you cannot unsheath your swords within a Muslim community, even if the leaders of this newly forming government are seculars, positivist, materials, whatever they are. When you fight, you are going to be fighting private soldiers who are who are believing Muslims. So he doesn't support the rebellion, but the rebellion was suppressed, and once it is suppressed, the government was afraid of his charisma in the region, and therefore they exiled him to Western Anatolia, to a distant village. And this is a picture from the top of that village, very distant in the sense that you had to climb a mountain with a jeep or horseback, and then cross a lake, and then climb a bit more, and that's where the village is. The idea was that he would be forgotten there. So they exiled him to this place, and slowly villagers started to recognize that, well, there's this great scholar among us, so we should go to him and benefit from him. They go and start asking questions. There were a few literate ones, one of them Hafiz too, among these villagers, and he starts to answer their questions, and as he answers, they start to take note, and then the notes that they start to share with other people who like these notes, copy them and pass on. Within 8 years, what constitutes the magnum opus of Nursi, which is today called Risale-i Nur, Epistles of Light collection. The four main books of this collection were written in this way and passed from hand to hand, like hand copied, in the form of treatises, about 130 or so treatises. And the government recognizes this. They put him in jail with about 130 of his, now close students. They cannot come up with any real crime. Therefore, they have to release him, but they now exile him to another town away from this village, hoping that now he won't have this network that's copying his works and passing it on. The same thing happens there. People gather around him, hand copy, and they put them in jail again and exile him to another place. The same thing happens. So one court case in 1948. He was exiled to this village in 1926. We are 1948. 22 years has passed. The prosecutor of a court case in 1948 estimates that there were about 600,000 hand copies, manuscripts of his works circulating around the country. So that becomes a force in and of itself for the preservation of religion and religiosity, along with certain practices that evolve about the reading of Nursi's works. Here you see a picture of the entire collection. In addition to those four books, the letters that he exchanges with his students become a part of the epistles, and a few other books. 1948, his students purchased spirit duplicators and started to duplicate these books, again, illegally, and spread them. But remember, 1950, the regime changes. The new populist government becomes more tolerant to Nursi and his students, although they don't let him live as he wants. They allow him to go and settle in Sparta and still limit his movement a little bit, but they let them publish Nursi's works, the Risale-i Nur, or Epistles of Light collection. I do not go into the content of what he says yet. I want to do the other way in the Justice and Development Party and come back to this. And checking time, 11:05. I have 25 minutes. So, as I mentioned, when Jalaluddin Ökten founds the first Imam and preacher school, the government allows the foundation of these schools, but does not really fund them. But remember, 80% of Turkey was rural. The rural areas were not penetrated. People are still believing. People still want to preserve religion. And that now that there are these schools in which imams can be trained, they are very happy, and they basically open up the purse. They start to donate money, charity money. And many Imam Hatip schools open up in time. Here you have, I don't know how much it is visible on your end. It's not even visible on my end very well, but here you have the number of students attending Imam and preacher schools by years. 1995, it had reached 300,000. 1997, 318,000. At this point, right, 1998, there was a soft coup d'etat in Turkey. The military intervened in politics. Why? Because in the 1960s, an Islamist party was founded. And this party also evolved almost like a movement because of the way that it organized at the popular level, right? It was banned many times and reopened many times, and its name changed many times, and therefore it is not. It is better to identify the movement with the men in charge. Actually, I put a picture here. I forgot to do that. But Necmettin Erbakan is the name of the person who was the founder of this party and the leader of the movement, the grassroots organization of the party becoming a movement. Right. This is also known as the Milli Görüş Hareketi, National View or National Vision movement, and there emerges a solidarity between the Imam and preacher schools and the larger communities that support Imam and preacher schools and this national view movement. And that political party does achieve some success from time to time in coalition governments. In the 1970s, for instance, they become the key partner in a coalition government, and they make sure that the number of preacher schools increase significantly in the 1970s, but they never were able to come to power. Right? In 1997, following elections in 1996, this party came to power again in a coalition government, but as a leader of the coalition government. And Turkey's secularist establishment, which was very powerful in the military, became very upset about this. And after a year or so, the military intervened to oust this party from politics and ban it altogether. And they decided that this was not only a political party issue, it was a larger movement in society, and the movement was mostly fed from Imam and preacher schools. So they wanted to close the Imam and preacher schools too, which they did. So as you can see, between 1998 and 2012, there is no Imam and preacher schools. In that process, in that context, they also banned the mayor of Istanbul from politics, because Istanbul is the largest city in Turkey. If you are the mayor of Istanbul, you are in the spotlight, and he was seen as the likely next prime minister of the country, right? They banned him from politics too. They introduced, so this party is banned from politics, another coalition government comes to power, but that coalition government proved to be, so we are here in 2000, that coalition government proved to be extremely corrupt. And within a couple of years, they led the country into an economic crisis. They did a devaluation, which meant that the rate of dollar to Turkish lira doubled overnight in December 2000, which led the country into a deep economic crisis, which disillusioned the larger population with the military who caused this new government and everybody involved in that government. So it was a very opportune moment for a new political movement. So that new political movement was the Justice and Development Party. It came out of the National View movement, the notable prominent members of which were all banned from politics. So the younger generation in that movement and in that the last political party, that was Welfare Party representing that movement, left their elders, saying that you are too ideological, the country is not ripe for that. We want to do real politics. We want to aim the votes rather than change the discourse, and we want to focus on issues that will win more votes for us, mainly becoming more populist, focus on economy, etc. And there were several well-educated individuals among these. Many of them having studied in Western universities with PhDs, having worked in international organizations. So a very high caliber, very highly skilled cadre of young individuals coming out of the National View movement found, and also not banned from politics, founded a new political party, which was the Justice and Development Party. And this banned mayor of Istanbul actually was the leader of this new formation. He was banned and he could not be the leader of the party directly, etc. But those who were in charge of affairs were proved to be very loyal to him, and they basically followed his direction. So that mayor was the current president of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. And as I said, this was a very opportune moment in 2002 with elections. The Justice and Development Party came to power. This is a later election, 2014, with a significant number of parliamentarians and also they got the prime ministry and the government. So they started to rule the country in 2002. In the meanwhile, IMF had intervened in Turkey, or Turkey had asked IMF to help, and an IMF program had started in Turkey to fix the economy, and the Just and Development Party government continued with the IMF measures, which are usually not very good, for immediate economic gain of the middle class. But after a few years, they were able to stabilize the economy, and the economy started to improve, and the country's GDP started to grow. Once they were in power, the Just and Development Party, they also changed a few laws that allowed Recep Tayyip Erdogan to come back into politics. And with a by-election, he became an MP, and then he became the prime minister. So from around 2003 or so, he was the de facto, and both the de facto and the official leader of this political party. Now, what did they do? Or who were they, right? I would hesitate to call the Just and Development Party an Islamic movement, or even an Islamist movement, at least at the beginning, for two reasons. One, it is not a movement. It's a political party. And once, this is, of course, my prediction, once it loses elections, and if and when Recep Tayyip Erdogan is not the leader of this party, I very much doubt that it will be able to continue as a movement, which would require grassroots ideological commitment, right? Second, at least at the beginning, at its foundation, it was not only Islamists or devoted Islamically oriented individuals who were in this party. It was rather a coalition of Islamic/liberal oriented politicians, some of whom came from the neoliberal oriented political party of the 1980s, some of which were conservative leftists, right? So it was a coalition, and because it was a coalition, it was able to win more votes too. So following the highly strived context of the 1990s, people were taking a deep breath that there was this, more reconciliatory environment in politics. And the main thing that endeared them to the people and increased their votes, like initially it was in the 30s, increased their votes, to 45%, and eventually even more, 49%, was this, right? This is Turkey's inflation rate, 1995. This is the economic crisis in 2001. This is what happens with the implementation of IMF measures, and this is what the Just and Development Party was able to maintain until around 2018, right? Economically, they did very well. Turkey's GDP per capita increased from around 3,000 to around 10,000 in this period. This is the dollar to Turkish lira exchange rate. It is a bit misleading up to this point, because around 2008 they dropped 6 zeros from the Turkish lira. So $1 was equivalent to almost 2 million Turkish lira. So they dropped that and equated 1 lira to $1 at some point. But still, you can see that following this hike, doubling in the economic crisis of 2001, the rate is more or less stable up until 2018, right? So what happened then? One of the rules that the Just and Development Party had introduced was that this should not become a one-man or few men or women dictatorial authoritarian political party. They required that nobody should serve in the party for more than 3 election cycles, which amounts to 15 years at the time. And those who were true to this and entered into the party in 2002 left around 2015, 2016, 2017, thinking that they were being principled. They left politics and they were thinking that they were opening up room for newcomers. However, when a political party is in power for three election cycles, especially in a country where the government was small, you remember, like the GDP per capita was 3,000 or so at the beginning, the political party becomes a means for seeking personal gains, which happened. So as these earlier idealists were leaving the party, new people were coming to the party. And here I'm not talking about only the top leadership. I'm talking about municipal level, even village level organization. New people coming to the party, not because they were Islamic or Islamist, but rather because they would not be leftist. They would not be militantly secularist. They would be, Muslim, but not ideologically convinced and established, right? They would come into the party because they saw that this was the way to access means of getting things done, be it a zoning project in the municipality, be it a government tender of construction of some highway somewhere, right? So the composition of the party changed tremendously, and again, therefore, I cannot call it Islamic or Islamist any longer. And this was the consequence, right? The dollar to Turkish lira today is 34 liras per dollar. And I'm not going to go into details of why this happened, but the underlying cause was this change in the party's mission, vision, composition, right? Now, it is still conservative. It still has an Islamic and increasingly even Islamist discourse, right? But the party itself is a very different thing. Islamist groups or Islamic groups in the country, many of the Sufi orders are now moving around more freely, and they have foundations and societies and buildings and schools and etc. They support this party and its governments because it gives them a free hand to move around freely. So there is a change in the piety, religiosity composition of the country, right? But this is not the party itself. It is rather the populist attitude of the party toward these Islamic movements and groups in the country. But at the same time, as the economy is going down the hill, the party is losing support. And this is the last elections, as you can see, from 45 in 2014, and in 2024, the municipal elections, the Just and Development Party came down to 24%. So what will happen after this? I don't know. I'm not a prophet to predict the future, but this is the situation about the Just and Development Party. Now, I will take another 10 minutes. I'm trying to stick to 1 hour as we had earlier talked. And I want to say a few things about, sorry, going the wrong way. Nursi, right? Now, Nursi, as a scholar, many people would consider him a saint, and many people would consider him a mujaddid, a renewer of Islam in the Islamic tradition. He inspired many movements. He did not inspire one movement, and I think that's important to keep in mind. So there is not one Nurju movement, but rather there's a large Nursian community of many movements. And he is, in terms of his intellectual, spiritual production, he is the equivalent of the likes of Imam Ghazali, Mawlana Jalaluddin Rumi, Imam Rabbani, and so on and so forth. Therefore, I think it would be best to understand Nursi with regard to his contribution, this intellectual and spiritual contribution, and leave the movements that he inspired on the side, because none of those movements are a measure of who Nursi was and what he brought. My understanding is that as his works are translated into more languages, which is a recent phenomenon, by the way, his works have become available in Arabic in the late 1990s on the internet, has never entered the larger distribution networks of Arabic language books in the world. His English translations are not complete and not very good, actually. But as his works are translated, or maybe some people learn Turkish and read his works, my understanding and educated guess is that he will be absorbed into many movements, Sufi orders, educational institutions, and so on and so forth, the way Imam Ghazali's works are absorbed, for instance. So therefore, what does he say? The content of his intellectual contribution is very important, and obviously 10 minutes is not going to do justice to it, but I will try. Okay. So first, what he contributes, his contribution is inspired with a dire need, right? And that dire need needs to be understood in the context of two things. One is the elimination, destruction of the religious, of the institutions that preserved religion and religiosity in the Ummah, the broader Muslim community of the world. As I said earlier, since at least the 11th century, the madrasas, the Sufi orders, and also the caliphate, right? This is all happening during, after, or in the course of the turn of the 20th century, during and after World War I. But it's a process. It's not just one event that happened in Turkey, right? This is something that's happening everywhere, or most of the places around the world. And that's not only the consequence of secularist, militant, anti-religious, etc. Governments, but also the consequence of modernity in general, which you might have heard of, Weber's the definition of disenchantment of the world, right? So, or Charles Taylor's notion of modernity and secularism, right? So the world in general is becoming secular. People in general are moving away from religion. Religion in general is losing its relevance for individual lives. But at the same time, the fundamental human predicaments are not changing, right? So, and this will be the second context in which we need to understand his perception of dire need, and that is what you can read here, right? There is death. We are not permanent in this world. There is, we are moving on to something else. Either, we need to be looking forward to complete disappearance, non-existence, or something else beyond the world. And non-existence is not a happy thing to look forward to. It's in and of itself is a predicament, right? We are impotent in the sense that we have many needs, poverty, right? We are, as human beings, anything that we can think and imagine can turn into a need. So here we are not only talking about need for food, shelter, water, etc., but for some it is a need to know what's happening on the other side of the moon, for instance, right? And we have very, very little, in reality, no means to achieve any of these needs. So the grave is waiting for us, right? So we are needy and impotent and looking forward to this dire end, right? If you can change, as he says here, if these could be changed, if this fundamental human predicament could be altered, perhaps we could listen to what the positivist, progressivist, modernists, etc. of the world were saying and are saying, as to forget about death, just live your life, humanity is progressing, etc. But since that is not the case, he says, be silent. in the great mosque of the cosmos, the Quran is reading the cosmos. Let us listen to it. And this is a very important phrase, the cosmos, the Quran is reading the cosmos, because that's going to be at the foundation of his method, intellectual, spiritual method, right? Okay. This is another thing. He says, and this is 1922 or something like that. Know that he who is enabled by divine grace can go from outward appearance to reality without crossing over the isthmus of the Sufi path. Verily, I have seen in the Quran a path to reality apart from the well-known Sufi path. Likewise, I have seen a path that conveys the ultimately intended sciences, that is the ulum al-aliyah, the high sciences in Islam, without crossing over the isthmus of the instrumental sciences, to ulum al-aliyah, the logic, language, etc. Yes, it is the conduct of the ruling mercy to bestow such a short and sound path to the children of this fast-moving time. So he says that he has a new path, but he's very conscious of this, and he also juxtaposes that with the Sufi path, or the, and here, not Sufism. That needs to be understood, right? He's not juxtaposing it with Sufism, with the Sufi path, or the methodology of the Sufi path, or of suluk, the spiritual journeying of, as a result of abstinence and constant dhikr and things like that, which he says is very good, and he does that himself, by the way, but is not available to the broader masses in this disenchanted world, and therefore people who don't have the means for, or the motivation and incentive for devoting themselves seriously to something like Sufi journeying, also need to be given means to preserve their religion and religiosity, and ultimately knowledge of God, ma'rifah, right? And he says that he found this in the Quran, and that is what he is going to convey in the epistles of light, right? One last reading piece from his works that should give us some sense of what that way is about. And again, I cannot explain it in depth. And here he says, monotheism is of two types. For instance, in the way that when the miscellaneous merchandise of a great person comes to a large marketplace or city, it is known in two ways that this is his merchandise. One is overall and naive. It says, no one has the circumstances to possess such a tremendous amount of merchandise other than him, this merchant. But much theft can occur under the supervision of such a naive person. Many people can claim the pieces of that merchandise. So say I am the guard of this merchandise piled up in the middle of the town square, and the thief comes to me and says, I know nobody can have this whole merchandise, but this particular merchant, for him you are guarding this stuff. But look at that little, say, 10. That 10 has mixed up into this merchandise. That is actually mine. And then if this thief is convincing enough, he may convince the guard and take away the 10. And in our the terminology, we call that shirk, right? So everything belongs to God. Everything is God's hands. I got sick. I took a pill, and I'm thinking that the pill is healing me. Right? That there's a hidden element of shirk there, depending on my intention and level of consciousness. The second type says, as though reading the label on each bale, recognizing the monogram on each roll, and knowing the cachet on each proclamation, everything belongs to that person. In that case, each thing has a meaning that points to that person. Right? Just like that, monotheism is of two types too. One is the naive and superficial monotheism. The sublime real, Janab al-Haq, God, is one. It says, the sublime real is one. He has no partner or likeness. This cosmos is his. So this is Tawheed, this is monotheism, and this is good. But the one whose Tawheed is in this mode is in danger of falling into what that guard fell. The second is true monotheism, and it is to open a window from everything directly to his light, God's light, by seeing his cachet of power, seal of lordship, and inscription of his pen on each and everything, with a certainty that comes close to witnessing confirm and believe in his divine oneness, in that everything comes from his hand of power, in his divinity and lordship, and in that he does not have any partners or assistants in any way in his dominion, and to attain a kind of continuous sense of presence before him. So what does this mean? How does one achieve that sense of presence and sense of witnessing? That takes us back to this phrase: the Quran is reading the cosmos, right? So what Nursi does is he develops cognitive patterns. When you read his books, he develops cognitive patterns in your mind which allow you to look at the cosmos through empirical means, look at the cosmos and see the signs of creation in the created world. It is very empirical, which corresponds to and meets the challenges of modernity, positive science, etc., which was a big problem for Kalam scholars at the turn of the 20th century. He does it in more detail. I would need, as I said, 3 lectures to do that. So I will end there. I hope I was able to give a glimpse of, both of these phenomena in Turkey, and I'm going to look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mustafa. We're very grateful to that encyclopedic introduction. Can you stop sharing your screen? There we go. So that they can see
I was just doing it.
Very good. So I'm going to let them start asking questions, but I wanted to ask one just to kick it off, which is less directly to do with your presentation and more to do with a question that's been coming up a lot over the past couple of days. The first day, we discussed the Muslim Brotherhood, and the suggestion was made, and I think I know what you'll say to this, but I think it's good to kick up the discussion. The suggestion was made that the AK Party is basically actually a Muslim Brotherhood movement in Turkey. And I'd like you to say what you think about that. And if it is, then, how or why. And if it isn't, then how or why.
Okay. Yeah. So it isn't, I think it isn't. It has sympathies for or some in the Justice and Development Party have sympathies for the Muslim Brotherhood. And that goes to would take us to the 1970s. So when the Islamist movement of national view started in the 1960s, and in some respects even you can trace it back to 1950s, but especially 1960s, they were not fully aware of or in touch with the Muslim Brotherhood networks in the larger world. Turkey was, to some extent, still is a very secluded place, and at that time it was much more secluded. Very few people knew Arabic, and obviously very few people outside of Turkey know Turkish. So it was a indigenous movement, influenced to some extent by those remaining Naqshbandi networks in Turkey. Some of the Naqshbandi Sufi masters at the time were suggesting to their followers, and the founder of one of these movements was a follower, to get involved in politics, to get involved in the world. In the late 1970s, some in this movement started to translate the works of the likes of Ali Shariati and Sayyid Qutb, etc., into Turkish. And this younger generation in the movement that is now, that was in charge, that were involved in the foundation of the party in 2002, etc., they did read that material. And they did learn about the Muslim brothers, and they had sympathies to the Muslim brothers, especially the Muslim brothers' willingness, or even more than willingness, the interest in getting involved in politics to sort things out in the name of Islam. Sort society, politics, economy, culture out in the name of Islam. And this was something that was very appealing to them, and they became familiar through this translation work. But there was never again any real connection and communication beyond, small instances of, acknowledgement and acquaintance. The first leader of the party, Abdullah Gül, who also became the president in 2007, worked in Saudi Arabia for a while, for instance. So there are friendships, etc., but not an engaged network. After the Arab Spring, when Muslim brothers had to escape from places like Egypt, Syria, etc., many of them came to Turkey, and the Justice and Development Party government welcomed them in Turkey. They were allowed to, for instance, broadcast into Egypt from Istanbul, and things like that. So there are these friendships. There is this sympathy, but for the same two reasons that I mentioned at the beginning. First, Justice and Development Party was not solely an Islamic formation at its foundation. It was a liberal/Islamic, and second, with that change of cadres in the party, except for some in the movement, the larger demographic basis of the party. I'm not talking about the people who vote for the party, but who are in the party, members of the party, working for the party. Many of them are not even religious anymore, let alone being Islamic, Muslim Brother affiliates. So there are parallels, there are sympathies, there are instances of interaction, right? But none of that amounts to the Justice and Development Party becoming a part or replica of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Very good. Thank you. Appreciate it. I know we have questions, so because of time, I'm going to take maybe sort of 4 or 5 at once, and then you answer as you see fit. Alhamdulillah. And if we have more time, we'll take more questions. So, who has a question? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 so far. But then we'll take these 4. Go ahead. Oh, you're gonna have to speak up.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum. Appreciate the talk. My question is in regard to Fethullah Gulen and Erdogan's relationship, and how that actually, because we see that they had a lot of in terms of working for.
I'm not able to hear fully. Would it be possible for whoever is going to ask the question to come closer to the?
No, so I'm going to move the laptop so that you can hear. It just means that you're not going to be able to see everybody in quite the same way anymore.
That's fine. That's fine.
Okay. All right. All right.
Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Okay. Appreciate your lecture. My question is in regard to Fethullah Gulen and his movement and Erdogan and their relationship. And how did that actually fracture? What actually happened? We read some portions of that, but it was like more or less a sanitized version of what probably happened. I'm quite sure you have some more in-depth conversation about that. And just in terms of why is that relationship such a fractured thing now? Just understanding more about the Gulen movement in general and how that relationship has been affected. In addition to the fact that seeing that Erdogan has done such a great job in bringing back the ability to show the signs of Islam openly in public and to express your desire and affinity for Islam as a Muslim, why is there such a negative response to him in terms of how some people see him outside of Turkey and inside of Turkey in terms of like the authoritarian dictator type conversation you hear most people have?
Okay, next question.
Yeah. As far as the drop in the value of the Turkey lira, you mentioned the reason for that is the influx of people who has not been the originator of the party, and because of that influx, the value of the lira became down. Is there any external effect of the financial world, I would say, the people who are financing or buying stuff or going for travel to Turkey and utilizing their money for something good in Turkey, like tourism, et cetera, buying houses in Turkey. So what happened during this time? Is it really because of the influx of people to the party, or is it external effect coming?
Okay.
So is there a concern, is there a concern that there will be restrictions to religious freedoms if the AK party loses and another party comes into power?
Simple question. I don't know if I missed it. The reestablishment of Islamic madrasas. Imam Hatib, who was he?
Can you repeat the last part of the question?
Imam Hatib.
No, that's so he's asking about the Imam Khatib schools, what you call Imam Hatib. It's not a name. Imam Hatib.
Imam Khatib is pronounced as Hatib in Turkish, and it means preacher.
It's not the title of a name. Second question. Oh, was he?
The origin of the school, I was trying to understand, you know, was he an imam or what, you know?
Khatib school.
But I think he's asking about the how you talking about this?
Yeah.
So
He said the Imam Hatib schools, who was responsible for establishing those?
okay. So who is the founder, or who is responsible for establishing the network of Imam Hatib school?
Okay.
Yeah, that's pretty close, you know. I got all these other.
We have time.
You mentioned that you doubt the continued survival of AK party because it's not a movement, it's a coalition of liberals. So I want to know whether you think Erdogan has acknowledged this, and that is why he's trying to position himself in monopolizing power.
In doing what? Position himself in doing what?
Monopolizing power.
Monopolizing power. Okay, we'll take one more, and then we'll come back to you. And please answer as you see fit, and then we'll see if we have time to do any more.
The Ataturk and the movement that came from, what was the why were they so strongly, you know, opposed to religion? What had happened with them that made them, I mean, I'm assuming it did come out of thin air. Like, what did they see that was such a serious problem that would motivate them to take such strict actions against the religious
Yes.
culture?
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Mustafa, answer those questions as you like. Okay.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I'll try. So we have 6 questions, mashallah. I'll try to give a short answer so that I can address everything. So first, I'll start from the last question. This was a larger intellectual environment of the world at the time. There was a positivist/materialist trend in Europe that culminated in the mid-19th century or so and defined the high intellectual culture of Europe. Now, there were other things going on, like Catholics were doing their thing, Protestant churches were doing their things, etc., etc. But this was what defined the high culture, especially the academic culture and those circles that were influential in politics. So this was what was happening in Europe, right? And Europe colonized the world and carried this version, the positivist materialist version of the worldview to the rest of the world. And when people saw Europe from far away, say from Japan, from China, from India, from the Ottoman Empire, from Africa, right? The Europe they perceived was a Europe that promoted positivism and materialism and belittled religion and saw religion as an impediment before progress. And those in the Ottoman Empire who were trained in westernized institutions of education, like a public administration school, medical school, military school, etc., and came out as intellectuals, meaning that they had this concern for the well-being of their society and the improvement of the politics, and they want to see the Ottoman Empire stronger, right? Associated this worldview with the possibility of progress, which they would very much define in material terms. And because that discourse in Europe associated religion with backwardness, right? This goes all the way back to like 18th century Enlightenment philosophers and so on and so forth. They learned from that this discourse, and I mean, I've seen magazines, etc., from the time, the periodicals from the time, where they literally say the Europeans were enslaved by their popes, meaning their priests. They got rid of their priests and broke their chain, and they progressed. We need to do the same. And we don't have popes. What do we have? We have imams, etc. Right. So this was something that defined, and the main incentive was progress and development. They thought that this was required in order to move forward, progress. Plus, there were lots of things that undermined their faith, like the prominence of Darwinism, etc. Things like that. So on one side there was an incentive. We want to progress, therefore we need to become less religious. On the other side, there were lots of intellectual attacks on the foundations of religion and challenges, and the kalams, the theologians had to respond to this. That's why there was a sort of vocalization of a need for a new kalam, and Nursi fits into that very well, because his methodology is empirical, which is the methodology of positivism, etc. So that's one. Where the madrasas, Imam Khatib schools are coming from, there were some scholars that's from the Ottoman Empire, and initially they taught in these madrasas. So in terms of where the knowledge is coming from, it is the remnant of the Ottoman Empire. In terms of where the incentive is coming from, as I mentioned, Turkey was 80% rural. The secular government was not able to penetrate the villages, and since 1950, Turkey went through an enormous period of urbanization. In 1923, Turkey was 20% urban, 80% rural. 1950, this had not changed at all. It was still 20% urban, 80% rural. Today, from 1950 to early 2000s, actually, it reversed. And Turkey became 80% urban, 20% rural, which means that those people who preserved their religiosity, if not religion, came to the cities, and they were interested in these schools. So there was this popular demand. And then there were scholars who, as Jamaluddin Ökten, the founder of the first Imam Khatib school, right? Now, in terms of the word Imam Khatib, Imam and Preacher School, that was something that had started in the Ottoman Empire. In the Ottoman Empire, there were a few Imam Khatib schools, so that set the model for, or the name for, the later schools. Will there be restrictions to religion in Turkey if the AK Party leaves? I don't know. I mean, that's not something that I can predict. I doubt, because whenever these restrictions were promoted by what is today the opposition party, they got a slap on the face, and then they were never able to win the popular vote as a result. So they were able to maintain their power, if they were able to maintain their power, thanks to military interventions and so on and so forth. Therefore, I doubt that they are going to attack religion in the country. However, many religious movements, groups, Sufi orders, etc., are benefiting from the state in terms of perks that the government doles out today. For instance, as I said, the government owns all the awqaf, the foundations, religious foundations, property, endowment property in the country. So they have a old madrasa building in Istanbul, say, that belongs to the government, and they give it to one of the Sufi orders and tell them, go ahead and use this, right? So there may be some, or even significant, I don't know, some withholding of the resources that have been given to these movements and groups in the country. In terms of overt restrictions on religion, like the headscarf ban and things like that, at least in the short term, I doubt that. If they stayed in power for many years, let's say 2 decades, as the Justice and Development Party has been in power, perhaps that may be possible. But in the short term, I doubt that there would be direct attacks on religion. Lira, change of cadres. So the outcome of the change of cadres was that skilled people who knew how to run economy left, and it was left in the hands of very unskilled people who had no merits how to run economy, and they advised Erdogan very badly. In 2017, Erdogan attended a what do they call it, a Bloomberg Forum or something like that, where big financiers of the world come together once a year and hold meetings, etc. Erdogan attended a gathering there, and he gave an interview. And in the interview, he said that interest rate is the cause and inflation is the result, meaning that if you increase interest rates, inflation, if you decrease interest rates, inflation will go down, right? So for anybody who knows some macroeconomics, in the world that we live, in the global economic system in which we live, it is the exact opposite of this. So when he said this, which also corresponded to a time when power was further centralized in his hands, he had become the president, the global financial institutions and money holders all perceived this as, Turkish economy is in horrible hands and it's not going to be stable any longer, and they started to withdraw their investments in Turkey. And although Turkey had kept inflation stable, exchange rate stable, increased its GDP from 3,000 to 10,000. This was mostly based on construction rather than structural changes in the economy. So Turkey was not moving from industrial production to intellectual software, etc., service sectors, etc., things like that. So it was very much that economic development progress of the decade or so in which Justice and Development Party did really well was very much funded by international money. When you give the international money holders the message that you are not going to have a stable economy any longer, they withdrew. They started to withdraw that money. And as you may have followed, 2 years ago after the election, Erdogan brought to a man named Mehmet Şimşek to lead the economy again. Mehmet Şimşek was the person who was running the economy during that good times. So he's from the old cadre, and the economy is starting to stabilize again, and that international money is starting to come back to Turkey, etc. So and there's a lot of rumors suggesting that the international powers to be wanted to do away with Erdogan and therefore withdrew money, etc. No, that's not the case. They literally, the people who ran the economy in Turkey literally gave this message to the world that they were going to destabilize the economy, which they did, because when you decrease interest rates, inflation increases, it doesn't decrease, and inflation hit triple digits in Turkey as a result. The official numbers are in the 80s, but the actual numbers, many observers suggest, hit triple digits. What else? I took notes, but I cannot understand one of my questions, so I will probably skip that and go to the Gülen one, which is probably going to be the most lengthiest question. Now, the Gülen movement was inspired by Nursi, but as I said, the Nursi has inspired many movements, and because he has such a great, well-respected name and such a deep scholar, associating oneself with his name is a big bonus for anybody who wants to do something, right? So the Gülen movement was initially inspired by Nursi. They read Nursi's books in their circles, etc. But increasingly, Gülen roles in this movement and in the presentation of this movement to the larger world as the leader who was equivalent to, if not, higher than Nursi, and they started to read Gülen's books, listen to Gülen's preachings, etc. Initially alongside Nursi's works and thoughts, but increasingly more so than Nursi's works and thoughts. And in the process, that movement lost some fundamental principles that Nursi would want any of his followers to follow. One of them is that you don't get involved in politics and administration. So if you are acting in the name of religion, if you are serving Islam, let's say, and let's put that way, in this world, the world may change down the road and things may be different, but in this world, if you are serving religion, or if you are a follower of Nursi, because he's requesting or requiring this from his followers, right? As a matter of principle, not as a matter of strategy, but as a matter of principle, you are not allowed to get involved in politics and administration. That's one. Two, ends do not justify the means. And he doesn't say it as this, but if you read the things that he says and put them together, this is what it means. Ends do not justify the means. If you have a very high end, you should not be going to that end through underhanded measures. I mean, there are other things too, but these two are very important. In these two fundamental principles that defines Nursi's thought and inspiration for activism, the Gülen movement parted with the Nursian thought. When Justice and Development Party came to power in 2002, it was they were a political movement, but they did not have an intellectual, broad intellectual basis that they could tap into in order to fill positions in the government. And the Gülen movement, because it had focused on schooling for such a long time, and also planting cadres in the government, they had lots of people that they could offer. And there was a major convenience between the two, the party and the Gülen movement. And Justice and Development Party appointed to many key positions in the country, many people affiliated with the Gülen movement because they were recommended by the Gülen movement. But when they were in power for 10 years or so, the Justice and Development Party, especially from the Imam Hatip school background, itself trained new people who could fill those cadres and started appointing them into those positions, gradually eliminating the Gülen presence in the government, and this led to a clash between the two groups. And the Gülen movement started to undermine government policies as a result of this. They no need to go into the details of how they start to undermine, but they were using their presence in the government to undermine Justice and Development Party policies. Now, whoever stays in power for such a long time is bound to be involved in corruption. So there were corruption cases, and the Gülen movement, because they were in the government, was keeping a tab of all of these. When this disagreement and parting of ways started to move into a level of clashing, right? The Gülen movement started to use their knowledge of various things in the government to undermine the Justice and Development Party, which led to an open clash, as a result of which the Justice and Development Party closed some of Gülen's educational services, which then angered them even further. But what brought the last straw on the camel's back, if you will, was that the party also knew who was Gülen people in the army, in the military. And it seems in 2016, in August 2016, they were planning on purging them from the military too. In August of every year, there is a top government officials come together and decide promotions in the military. So they were planning to purge those people in the Gulen movement from the military, and some of them got the wind of this, and it seems, although we cannot prove this, but there are facts that all suggest this. Those in the military organized a coup or attempted coup, which was a very poorly organized coup attempt because they had panicked. Right? They were going to be eliminated from the military, and they were not going to have the chance to do this any longer. Now, this is the important thing to know about this is that this is not a question of who is right. If you like, I think both sides are wrong. They both did terrible mistakes. The purge that followed the coup affected many people in the Gulen movement who were in the movement because they thought this was a charitable movement, etc., who had no idea about the coup attempt, and in that sense, the purge that followed the coup attempt went beyond its aims too. But that if you look at it from the government's point of view, that was a very realistic decision because it did finish the Gulen movement in Turkey. I think I skipped one question, but I'm out of time too.
Dr. Mustafa, thank you very much. We've gotten indeed to the end of our time. You had some very difficult questions, but I think you acquitted yourself quite well. Alhamdulillah. You should know that as you spoke, we had a call from the Turkish embassy. Just kidding. But we thank you. We appreciate
Let them call me. Tell them to call me.
I think they've got your number. Don't worry.
Okay.
But we appreciate your time very much. Thank you. And I know that the students were really looking forward to discussing more about Turkey, and we will continue this conversation after we do our own break. But they now have some sort of basis upon which to have quite an informed discussion, and that's due in no small part to your excellent presentation. So we thank you, we appreciate your time, and on behalf of Bayan, our appreciation and gratitude. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Thank you very much. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.